first going to have you respond to the attack ads that have been out there against you. What is your response to those?
Why do I have to respond to attack ads? They're so mean. Look, the thing about Nebraska is it's got great values. I love the values of the state. People are patriotic. They're people of faith. They love their families, their communities. They're very welcoming. They don't behave like these attack ads. So they're welcoming me back. Even people who say I'm not going to vote for you are being very, very nice. So it's nice to come home. It's very much like the homecoming that I got when I got out of the service in '69 and came home from the hospital. People are being very, very nice, and it's wonderful.
What do you think about some of those things that those ads are saying about you?
Well, I know what they're trying to do, but what I'm trying to say is that Nebraskans should not feel badly about themselves as a result of these ads, because in some ways it says something bad about Nebraska. Nebraskans aren't people that don't welcome people home. I mean, we're trying to recruit people all the time. The young people are coming back to the state right now. They were leaving when I was governor in the 1980s. That's who we are. Don't believe these ads. They're trying to make me look bad, but unfortunately they can make Nebraska look bad, and that's not who we are.
All right. You made a comment to Mr. Bruning, I believe, that you think that it is inappropriate to call the president by only his last name. Looking back now in perspective, do you think that was a bad move for your campaign?
Not really. No. There's been a lot made of it, but I've been disrespectful. I've got experience doing this as well. It wasn't like I'm saying, this is something horrible and so forth. But I think if I'm referring to President Bush, I should refer to him as President Bush. I can have a disagreement with him. I could vote against him, but the presidency is a big deal, and experience has taught me that over time it takes a while to get this understanding. But I've worked with presidents dating all the way back to President Reagan, and I just sort of didn't start off with in politics with an attitude towards the presidency that says, be careful what you say. You make your disagreement, particularly with the president, as respectful as you possibly can.
Looking back on that now, do you think that there are more important things to focus on in this campaign than whether or not to call the president by his last name?
Yes, but as you know, in politics, you sit and somebody asks you in the press a question, you answer the question, that of a sudden becomes a big deal. So it came from your side of the profession. The question was, do I think it's disrespectful? My answer is yes. Do I think it's an important issue in a campaign? No. But it's my experience tells me that that you got to be respectful of the office of the presidency.
Speaking of important issues in a campaign,
yes.
What are you going to adopt? What things are you going to try and push forward here as you're moving around the state campaigning?
Well, right now I'm just reconnecting. I'm telling people, look, it was my wife who said I wasn't happy with the decision not to run, and she was the one that urged me to file and to become a candidate, and I'm doing so because I have a set of experiences that I think could be helpful for Nebraska. And I think could contribute to resolving a number of serious problems in the Senate. I have balanced budgets. I've been working on it for 30 years. I was governor. I worked with the Nebraska unicameral. We balanced the budget. We set our independent revenue forecasting. We created a rainy day fund. We created fiscal solvency. Republicans and Democrats working together to get it done. I supported President Herbert Walker Bush in 1990. The budget summit in that year. All we did in 93 and 97 is to amend it. 97, it was John Kasich and Newt Gingrich. We didn't just balance the budget. At the end of the decade, our median family income was going up and the poverty rates were going down. I've co-chaired the Concord Coalition for the past 10 years, so I've got experience dealing with these things and know that the only way you're going to solve the problem is by breaking with your party and finding common cause with a Republican who's also patriotic and worried about the country if you don't get it done. I've been doing national security since I volunteered for the Navy in '66. I've served the United States Navy SEAL team. I came back. I was governor, managed the National Guard, was in the Senate for 12 years, voted on peace issues, was on the Intelligence Committee, but most importantly for me, I was in New York City when we were attacked. I was on the 9/11 Commission. So I don't need a staff person to tell me what to do to keep this country safe against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I certainly don't need to be reminded of the importance of helping those men and women. They come back out out of the service. The suicide rate's the highest of any war in the history of this country. So experience tells me what to do in each one of those cases. I've been creating jobs since 1973. In the state of Nebraska, I've been creating jobs since then. And I don't need to be told that there are times when the government is a barrier. It can make it more difficult as a consequence of regulations that are unnecessary or certainly don't add any benefit that I can see to health and safety. So in a number of other areas as well, I've got a set of experiences that lead me to believe that if Nebraskans want me to, I can go back to Washington and represent them and do good here at home and for the country.
You spoke of the budget. If elected, what would you do to help with the nation's deficit issue right now?
Well, I'm certainly not going to make any promises that hem me in to make it impossible to do it, because the challenge right now is Republicans are promising no new taxes. Indeed, right now they're promising to cut taxes again. You're not going to solve a problem of an 8% of GDP in deficit by cutting taxes one more time. Certainly if you can reform it and make the tax code more simple than it currently is and be more, I would say, growth-oriented than it currently is, that's all well and good. But the country's going to have to generate some more revenue, and you can't box yourself in by promising never to do anything with entitlements, because it's the number one problem inside of the budget. And by the way, I mean, I've my own experience in Washington and listening to people talk about Washington, I think the rules in Washington have to change. The caucuses are too powerful. They've become part of the problem. Republicans are afraid to break with their caucus. Democrats are afraid to break with their caucus. I mean, I honestly think this budget would be relatively easy, deficit would be relatively easy to solve if you didn't have the caucuses, like we have in the unicameral. Nebraska doesn't have a Democratic leader. It doesn't have a Republican leader. Everybody knows who's the Republican and the Democrat. The parties are still alive and well. I think these caucuses in both the House and the Senate have become a problem because they punish people when the Republicans break with their caucus or the Democrats break with theirs. And therein lies, it seems to me, the reason that Congress has been so unable to do much for the last 3 or 4 years.
You think it's causing too much tension between the two parties?
No, I think that it's not so much tension. If you're in the Republican caucus and I'm in the Democratic caucus and we decide we're going to work together on Social Security or entitlements or tax reform or something, your caucus will say, what are you doing working with that Democrat? You're going to give him a victory. My caucus will say the same thing. I mean, take health care, for example. In 94, it's weird. I feel like Rip Van Winkle. But in 94, John Chafee, who was a wonderful human being, who was Secretary of the Navy when I was in the Navy. He was a Republican from Rhode Island. He led an effort to try to find a bipartisan, we call it mainstream coalition on health care. And in that proposal, there was an individual mandate to purchase insurance. I had never supported that in the past. I got criticized by the White House and the Democratic caucus for supporting it. Bob Dole was on it. John Chafee was on it. It came from the Heritage Foundation, but it illustrates the point that I'm making. At the time, in my caucus, in the Democratic caucus, there was lots of people critical that I was participating in something that was undercutting the Democratic president. Likewise, John Chafee found himself being criticized by doing something that might give the Democratic president a victory. Right? Rather than stepping back and saying, can't we give the American people a victory? So even as recently as 94, as long ago as 94, these caucuses, which, by the way, weren't there at the founding of this country, were demonstrating that they were becoming more and more a part of the problem rather than a part of the solution.
The pipeline is an issue that has been at the forefront lately. Do you have a stand on the issue?
Well, I do. I mean, I'm very happy that a group of basically people on the right and people on the left got Keystone to move the route. TransCanada was down here using eminent domain to seize easements on property before they even had a permit. You can't put a pipeline over the aquifer. I haven't reviewed the new route, but thanks to, again, this bipartisan legislature, I give the unicameral a tremendous amount of credit. I think Speaker Flood did a great job saying Nebraska has authority here. I'm a little concerned that they've not put it back in the DEQ, because I'm not sure DEQ's got the resources necessary to evaluate, but Nebraska has a big role to play. The state not the states, U.S. senators, but the state's got a lot of authority in deciding where that route is going to be. Now, we've got pipelines going across the state, but we have a right to say we're concerned about our environment, we're concerned about other things, and so I will let the state take the lead. The state says we've decided it can go, then I would likely I'm going to support the permit. I'm not opposed to it on ideological grounds, but the state of Nebraska has a right to decide what they're going to allow to come across our land.
So you're in support of a pipeline, just not across the Ogallala Aquifer?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if the state of Nebraska it says we've satisfied all the concerns that we have, I can't imagine that I'm going to oppose it. In general, I'm not opposed to these kinds of things, except in this particular case, the way they were doing it and where they were going, I found to be deeply offensive. And fortunately, a large group of people both on the left and the right rose up, persuaded the legislature to finally take action, and they did. They did, I think, the appropriate thing.
All right. How do you respond to those carpetbagger comments, those people that are saying that you aren't a Nebraskan? And
It's offensive to Nebraskans. It's not the way Nebraskans are. We're glad when our kids come home to our state. We're trying to recruit people into our state all the time. We don't invite somebody to move to Nebraska and say, oh, by the way, if you decide to run for office, we're going to call you a carpetbagger. It's not who we are. These are non-Nebraskans running these ads. These are not people from Nebraska. One actually lives in New York City, for God's sakes. So this is an advertisement intended to do damage to me. That I'm sympathetic to and understand. That's their intent. They don't want me to win an election. But it's offensive to the values of the state.
Do you feel like you came to Nebraska strictly to run for Senate?
No, I've got family here. I've been paying taxes here. I've got businesses here. I've been back a lot over the last 10 or 11 years. My wife and I have been looking for a place to buy, regardless of how this outcome goes. We're going to spend a lot of time here. I've got a 10-year-old. I mean, I want him to learn the values of the state. I want him to meet his cousins. I want him to get to know the place and the people of Nebraska.
What have you identified a main problem that you would address if elected?
Well, I've identified 2 or 3 here this afternoon. I mean, the processes, the rules of Washington have to change. I don't know if it's just filibuster and holds or whatever, but Washington, D.C. has to change its rules. It might even lead me to examine Article 1 of the Constitution. Secondly, we've got to get this deficit behind us, and you've got to do it in a bipartisan way. A Republican idea of seeking a couple of Democratic supports or vice versa is not the way to solve the problem. My experience tells me you've got to start right from the beginning with the Republican who understands and is willing to support a tax increase, so long as the Democrat are willing to support real spending reductions and real constraint, particularly on the long-term portion of entitlements. Likewise on national security. My experience tells me we're headed to a potential catastrophe if the sequester kicks in the way that it's about to kick in another 7 months. The last thing I say is I believe it's not healthy for our country to have median family income in decline and poverty rates going up. The gap between the rich and poor isn't the problem. It wasn't created by the rich, but it is our laws that create an opportunity for all of us to say that we're going to get our fair shot at the American dream.
What is your take on international affairs?
Well, we have a big obligation. I mean, the bad news is, the good news is we're Americans. The bad news is that comes with big obligations. For openers, the most important part of the U.S. economy is agriculture. Obviously, it is for Nebraska. I regret that I've not heard President Obama in his State of the Union, or, by the way, Governor Romney, cite basic production agriculture as our most important manufacturing business. But it is. If commodity prices were what they were in the early 1980s, unemployment in Nebraska would probably be 4 points higher, and the U.S. national unemployment rate probably another 1.5. It's enormously important, and it's dependent upon good trade policies, fair trade policies. It gives us access and them access, and there's situations where we can get a good fair trade agreement and works for both sides, and it's been very, very helpful for Nebraska, where I think it's probably still roughly a third of our product that we ship overseas. Secondly, you can see international incidents can create tremendous problem for us. So I believe having the United States forces forward deployed and having the United States being the strongest military on the planet is very important, not just for us, but for stability in the world, which eventually accrues benefits to America. I think both Iraq and Afghanistan have demonstrated that we have to be very, very careful about sending large-scale military forces into another country, attempting to remake them in our image. I supported the Iraq War from the beginning. I supported what President Bush did in Afghanistan. But I think all we have to say is what President Bush said, which is there are no sanctuary for terrorists. We don't have to have a land army in Yemen to be able to go after Al Qaeda in Yemen, which we're currently doing.
What about Syria and North Korea? What do you think about those?
Well, I think we need to continue to press Syria to the Syrian government, Bashar Assad, to step aside. But the Syrian forces military forces are much stronger than in Libya. I do not think that we ought to be considering a land war there, but I think we do have to support the resistance that's going on in Syria. I'm not quite sure how far that I would go, but if Syria comes down, if Syria is liberated by the people themselves and they get rid of Bashar Assad, you've gotten rid of Hezbollah. You've got Lebanon that's going to be stable. Much more likely that the democratic experiment in Iraq is going to be successful. So I think there's an awful lot at stake in Syria, and I think we need to both pay attention of it and support, both for political reasons, that is to say strategic reasons, as well as humanitarian reason, the effort to overthrow Bashar Assad.
All right, and one last thing. You served on the board of a company, I believe you stepped down in March,
right,
that attempted to access Tarp Funds by buying struggling banks. Can you go into this at all, and what do you think about that move? Well,
it was a little more complicated than quite that, but this is a company that itself was having financial trouble during the financial crisis of 2008, and the FDIC had a failed bank that they were trying to sell. They eventually did sell, and they approached this company saying, if you'll buy this bank, there might be TARP money available. In the end of the day, it didn't work out, so the company didn't do it.
All right. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No. I don't think so.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.